I really want to get into Hold the Line while we're like really getting into it. So like, what are what are the actions that people should be taking between the time they're listening to this podcast, hopefully they're listening before election day, and election day? And we'll talk about what to do after that, but at least what to do in this like odd sort of like hellstorm moment where we're like in the last couple days or the last couple weeks of the campaign.
Right. So there's three things people can do. One is get yourself registered to vote. Two is get everybody you know registered to vote, essentially. And when I say registered to vote, it doesn't just mean like go on the website, put in your name. Great, it's done. Elections are kind of complicated in this country and just really hard to understand, honestly. Especially like if you haven't voted before, it's very intimidating to like, let's say if you want to actually go to the polls, it's actually really intimidating to go there and like nobody there isn't it's really hard to see instructions oftentimes. Like you see a line, you get in line and you're just like, okay, am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? Like I feel like there is like a lot of just nervousness around elections too, like especially if you're new to it. So
And that's not even
it's
throwing
not just
COVID into the mix as well. Like that's gonna make
oh my
this all
god.
worse.
Exactly. It's like, oh my God, do I like stand close to this person? Do I not? Like, why is there not a 6 foot marker here? I don't know. It's like there's going to be a lot of anxiety around elections, just the mechanics of it. And so one thing that I always say, like whenever like we're talking about registering to vote, like it's not just about registering to vote. You need to make a literal plan to the T. Like you
Yes.
need to call you need to let your employer know, hey, I want to vote, but the lines might be long, so I can't just be gone for my lunch hour. Like I might need to be gone for like 2 to 3 hours to make sure my vote gets in. If you have kids, you want to like arrange for caretaking, like it maybe there might be long lines, and so you don't want to like just leave because there's a long line. Like bring water with you, bring your medicine with you, if that's something that you need. Bring a fully charged phone, because if you're just standing there in line, you could look up what's actually what's actually on the ballot. Fill out a ballot ahead of time so that when you get there, you're not overwhelmed by all of the boxes and you've actually had a chance to look at what it looks like before. I mean, I remember like one of my mom's friends, she voted for the first time like in the primaries, and she was so nervous. She's an immigrant woman. She's like never she doesn't speak English very well. She literally did not know who to vote for at all. And I mean, we don't even know that she was planning to vote, but she basically called my mom like the day of, like saying, I want to vote, but I don't know how,
Wow.
and we had helped her with her voter registration. But the mistake that I realized we made was we didn't actually help her write down a plan. We didn't say, go to this address, bring this paperwork with you just in case. We didn't say like this is what is actually going to happen. And so like it was very like I literally like got off of work. I like took my lunch break and I was talking to her on the phone. I was like, okay, auntie, okay, drive when you get there, call me. And then I called, and then she called me, and then like I basically like helped her go through the whole ballot, explained to her like things, but it was me explaining it from like my room. And like it's not there was nobody at like the polling place necessarily explaining anything to her. And so like that, I think that's just like an example of, I think, that is the experience that everybody goes through, and that I wish we didn't have to go through just to exercise our right that we have and the power that we have to essentially control like how our lives are going to turn out in the next couple of years. Like that's what elections are. You are making active decisions on how you want your community to look like in like a couple of years. And I'm not just talking about presidential election, I'm talking about local election. Those people that you vote for, like they are going to be the ones determining a lot of things that impact, just what you see on a day-to-day basis on your street. And people, I think that connection is so hard. Like I think about how my family interacts with elections too, and it's like there's a disconnect. They think voting is one thing, but they don't realize that voting for that person can translate into this actual thing that has occurred in our community. And so yeah, anyways, that was like a rant.
But like but going off of that, like I think it's hard, especially in communities of color, because there's a lot of
Yeah,
cynicism that I'm holding my cynicism gun. I'll be drawing that shortly, but like
totally.
we'll hold on to that. But like communities of color, not just like, let alone the Republican Party, which is like lied to them as well as they've lied to everyone and promised them things they weren't going to get. But like Democrats have also done their fair share of promising things that Democrats had no intent of delivering on, saying that they would defend these communities while like secretly and covertly approving measures to spy on these communities or over police these communities. And so there's a lot of healthy and also unhealthy skepticism within a lot of cultures. And even then, like, I think what you were even getting at right there is how important it is to build a plan around voting. And by plan, it's like not just getting up there to vote, but also knowing what your ballot looks like, who is potentially running, because there's also the experience of being overwhelmed by how much there is to vote for. Like there's all these, in California especially, there's propositions and there's judges and council chiefs and all this different stuff. So it helps to utilize whatever is in your state. As far as like voter guides go, usually the Secretary of State for whatever state you're in has voter information on their website, and your like county Secretary of State as well. A lot of people get mailed out voter guides as well, as I know. So I think that's really important to like make a plan for election day so that you are able to, if possible, get time off of work and allow yourself that space to vote or take care of kids or whatever, but also know what you're going to do once you get in there, and to make that process as easy as possible. I also emphasize vote by mail if it's not too late to do that, although in many states it is. And that's like a whole mess too. But mainly, like, if we're going through like the 4 parts of Hold the Line and the action document that is available in the description of the video version of this podcast, as well as the show notes. But mainly, other than, as far as still the pre-election part of things go, other than making a plan to vote, is there any major thing people can do, like volunteering as a poll worker or anything else like that for like holding the line?
Yes. Yeah. So the first 2 things I would say are definitely like register to vote, make a plan to vote, and then help other people register to vote and then make a plan to vote. And then the third most important thing, I think, is signing up to be a poll worker. So this is like a new thing. It's not a new thing, but I think around more than 50% of poll workers in the 2016 election were like over 61 years old. And with COVID-19, a lot of older folks, like, it is dangerous for them to essentially be out there. And so we are going to, what we are anticipating is we're going to see a shortage in poll workers across the country. Just to give like a case example, which is actually outlined in the guide, but I think it's like it shows like a very clear, it clearly really shows the impact of poll workers in the election. So in Milwaukee, which is in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the 2016 election, there were 182 polling places that were open. And this was like obviously before COVID, right? And so at this primary that just happened, it went from 182 to 5 because of the fact that there were not enough polling workers and polling places needed to be consolidated. And so we're anticipating across the country, this is definitely going to happen. Especially in areas where the normal population of poll workers who often volunteered were older. And so it's kind of like up to the young people here. We got to like turn out.
I'm still kind of,
be a poll worker.
I'm blown out by your statement of going from like 182 or some number like that to 5 polling stations in the entire city. The city of Milwaukee, which like for Wisconsin, it's a fairly homogenous state, let's say. It's a large state. It's a homogenous state largely, except for those like urban centers in those urban areas. Kenosha, Wisconsin is another one of those like sort of examples and outliers there. So these poll closures are happening in places where it's very deliberate. These poll closures are happening in places where people of color are more likely to turn out and vote to overturn the power establishment. And also, it's not just people of color, just like regular like working class white folks who are also put down the ringer of capitalism in this case and are taught to pit themselves against other people of color to distract from the fact the rich people are looting the system. But enough about that.
And in Milwaukee, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
In Milwaukee, actually, like the turnout for in the primary this year, it went down by 37%. So like,
Jesus.
Yeah, that's huge. Like those types of margins will be the difference between, between like who actually wins this election.
In a swing state like Wisconsin, it's definitely like on the board. A lot of like people on the left, if we're doing like a journal right now of this time being in like late September, people are decreeing, oh, Joe Biden's going to sweep and do really well in all these swing states. He might even pick up Texas and et cetera. And maybe he will, maybe he won't. But I've learned the hard way to not lean in and let my guard down when polling shows the favorable things in general. I just like there's so many factors going on this year, especially that are working against the vote. That even I, as like a smug California, Los Angeles voter in a very deeply blue district, who would usually use this opportunity to not care about the top of the ticket and vote extremely down ballot. I'm worried about making sure my ballot counts when I know other people's won't. So I'm taking even my vote more seriously. So it's rough times. And if it's okay, I think I want to move on to like kind of part two, because I think that's where, I mean, at least like for me, it gets really juicy of Hold the Line. So part two is kind of just like election day scenarios. It posts a bunch of different scenarios for what could happen on election day, what the potential power players, let's say, could do at this time. And so I've had a track record on this podcast of being like a doomsayer about saying election day is going to be a shit show. We're not going to have a definite like winner on the night of, and anyone who tries to be a winner on the night of is probably trying to do some spin to get ahead of the game, because that's really powerful to claim yourself to be the victor when you're not actually the victor. Hashtag beat Buttigieg. But like, there's going to be that issue that's happening. There's going to be a lot of people who are there's going to be a lot of votes coming in, especially from California. So like, I think it's going to be a mess, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's like protests / riots in the streets after this, unfortunately, because of our political climate. But are you possibly able to grace our listeners and viewers with some rosier scenarios for what could happen on election day, or am I just on the right path?
You're on a plausible path.
But you heard it from an expert. That's just not just me. I heard it from an expert now. So.
So there's like, so we outlined 3 scenarios in the guide. Of course, there are multiple other scenarios that could totally play out. And the reason we went with these 3 particular scenarios because they're kind of like more general buckets of what could actually happen. So I can like break them down real quick. So the first scenario is election day results are super unclear, and then Trump just declares victory anyway. And so this kind of like, this would kind of look like, you know, like mail-in ballots are still coming in, right? They haven't been counted yet, but Trump has already like set the stage for saying that mail-in ballots are like fraudulent, you know? So there's like, you know, opportunity for him to kind of play out this scenario. There's like a lot of other scenarios that could go down too. Like even if he, like if the election day results are unclear, ballots are still coming in, Attorney General Bill Barr could jump in and basically start an investigation into the Biden campaign, halting the counting of the ballots, confiscating the ballots. Postmaster DeJoy can essentially slow down delivery of the mail-in ballots and deliver them a little too late to be counted. There's like a lot of things that could essentially happen, but the main thing is that this is a scenario where nobody really knows who the winner is. Votes are still being counted here and there, and there's also accusations in the air that the votes are invalid and that Biden is essentially trying to cheat. And so the line that we outlined that we want to hold essentially with this scenario is that every vote needs to be counted without interference or intimidation. And this particular line, we can actually start holding starting today. So we can start organizing proactively before, and then also organize the day of election day, and then from election day to inauguration day. So that's like the first scenario. The second scenario is around like the election results show that there's like a lot of irregularities or like signs of tampering and stuff. There's been evidence in this country in previous election years, like there have been evidence of like electronic voting machines switching their votes. I think there was like a story about like Indiana. In Indiana, they're like the votes were constantly being switched for multiple elections, and that is very likely to happen again. There's other questions around like in areas where there is an even split between Republican and Democrat voters. Like there could likely be irregularities where there's a huge like a Republican win, and that type of margin doesn't make sense, or like there's more people that voted than actually exist in like the county, for example. So the other scenario that we kind of outlined is there could be a chance that different irregularities could show up, and as everyday people, it's on us to make sure that those irregularities are investigated without any type of without any interference, and that they're investigated fairly, and immediately. So that's like scenario number 2. And I guess the line to hold. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could just pause there for a moment, like what is the difference between like a Bill Barr style, we're gonna try to rush in and take power as we're coming in, and the Trump camp trying to muddy the waters about what is an election irregularity versus what we should see as a, hey, there's some madness going on in Cuyahoga County or whatever, and so we've got to like investigate that. Like, how should a regular concerned person kind of like understand what the difference is? Is it the source, or like how would we be able to tell?
I think that I don't think it necessarily has to do with whether or not what Trump is doing necessarily. Like, I think what it goes down to is, as a regular person, you have power over your locality. You have power, not that you have power over your election officials, but you can identify who the election official is in your county. You can like remind them starting now that it's their constitutional duty to make sure that the vote is counted fairly. And that they need to do everything in their power to make sure that votes are counted fairly, essentially. So you can like put pressure that way. So I think the bottom line is, where you are, you should be watching for those irregularities that pop up. So that does require doing some homework. And like what Trump may be doing during, like, all this is possibly going to happen at the same time, right? Like, these scenarios aren't like distinct scenarios. Like, they could possibly all happen together at the same time too.
There's a lot of overlap for sure.
There's a lot of overlap. So Trump could definitely possibly be trying to do, like, you know, like Bill Barr could totally like go in and try to confiscate different ballots, etc. But if that's happening in your county, you can stop him. Like, there are election officials who can stand up to Bill Barr and to like Trump, you know? And so knowing who those people are and applying pressure to those people is what you can do in all of these scenarios. And that's essentially what we outlined later on in the guide of, from where you're at, like, who are the power players? Who are the people that you can start you need to essentially figure out who they are, and then what can you do to hold them accountable and also make sure they do the right thing. And for a point of clarification here, like, the guide is essentially like a guide to protect democracy. It's not a guide to get Biden elected. Obviously, like, we have very grave concerns if Trump would get elected, and that is not a scenario that we would like. But if Trump gets elected legitimately through a fair election, then, I mean, we are still upholding democracy. So the point of this...
I know there even might be some folks in the audience who are like, the democracy was never legitimate in the first place. And like, like, I'm not going to wholly disagree with that statement either, but I think it is just wholly delusional at this point to look at the threat that Donald Trump is posing to the limited structures that do exist. I mean, I'm holding out hope in something that's likely not going to come to fruition the way I want it to, but I'm still holding out hope that like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and like maybe a Democratic majority in the House and possibly in the Senate, although not likely, I'm hoping that they at least have like a country to run when all is said and done. But like, it's very clear what happens if the Republicans are able to keep power. It's even very clear what happens if they're even able to fill a Supreme Court seat. It's disastrous. So not to derail you again. Right. Like, I think it's just like, that's very important.
And I totally agree. And with the folks who are saying that, I actually completely agree with you. Like, what we have left of democracy is like a tiny little like sliver, to be quite honest. Like, voter suppression has been happening for like years, for centuries. And like, people don't technically everyone in this country has not actually had access to influence this country and make decisions for their future, right? And so democracy has failed people down. Like, democracy in the way it has been run so far has definitely failed in this country multiple times. But what we're talking about here is, we're kind of at like the last line here. And once this line gets crossed, getting back on the other side will be even more difficult than we've already had to deal with. And we've already seen like how like the effect of like Trump in power and like what he's done to already destroy democracy bit by bit. But this is kind of like, I don't know, this is like what's like in the games, oh my God, I'm totally
in
blanking.
The sports.
In this. Anyways, whatever. This is basically, not to be like doomsday again. And I know I know you resonate with me in this respect, but this is basically the end, essentially. And so this is essentially the line we need to hold. And then the other thing I do want to make a point of, the tactics and the instructions we basically outline in this guide, they're not just meant to be used to like protect the 2020 election and then everybody go to sleep after. Like what we are doing is building democracy insurance. We are starting out now to build it out now, but like the effect of organizing in this particular way will create groups and communities who are going to be more engaged, who are going to be able to understand the system a little bit more. And that in itself is going to bring us closer to getting to a better democracy than we've had before as well.
So getting into part 3 a little bit, what could you explain to the audience what election protection groups are? So like those are the scenarios that we just like kind of see are potentially there. And of course we encourage folks to check out the full guide to get all the detailed information. That there's a lot in there, but like any question you have will probably be answered by that document if you look into it. But yeah, could you explain for the audience what election protection groups are?
Yeah, so we call them election protection groups because it's essentially like what you're doing. You are protecting the election. And honestly, it's literally just a group of people getting together, doing homework together, essentially, doing their research and figuring out who the players are in their area that they can hold accountable to stop Trump from cheating his way to another 4 years. And essentially like responding. And so we break it down into 2 different like phases, essentially. Well, not 2 different phases. There's like 4 different steps actually that we outline. And obviously there will be more steps that will be needed, but these are the first 4 steps you can take essentially to get yourself set up. So like step 1 is create your team. And by team, it doesn't mean like you're gonna like have to like recruit like 20 different people. Like you and one other person is still a team, honestly. And the fact that you're even gathering together to even start having a conversation around this is getting us still closer to protecting our democracy, to be quite honest. Our biggest flaw in like losing our democracy is the fact that we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about our systems enough. We don't like make it a normal part of our conversations. We don't make the structures and the systems a normal part of our conversation. And that's why we're like so removed from it now. But anyway, so that's step 1, create your team. Step 2 is make a response plan. And in the guide, we kind of like outline like how to go about that. Step 3 is like figuring out roles amongst your team and then starting to recruit support amongst your local community. And then step 4 is like preparing yourself to execute essentially if based off of like your response plan. The step 2, I think, is like the most important one. This is like where like traditional organizing, this is where we all kind of put our organizing brains together. And this is what organizers essentially do. Like when you want to solve for a problem, you figure out who the people are who hold power. Then you put them like on a map and you figure out, okay, like, can I influence this person? Can I not influence this person? What is the research behind all of these individuals? And then you figure out who is the one individual that you need to talk to basically get to your goal. And so that is essentially what we do in step 2 of the guide. We basically help you go through step by step of how do you actually go about figuring out who the power players are in your local community, who you need to talk to, like who do you need to call and tell them that you are concerned about what's happening. And then after you call them, what do you need to do if you see that the lines are being crossed both nationally and locally? So that's like a quick overview of the guide of the steps.
So it's really just like figuring out, like you're getting a team together. You're just kind of distributing the work because, as I've talked about in some of my previous work, when you're starting in an activist sort of space, it's very easy to burn out. There's a study that it's not. It's hard to really replicate these kind of findings, but whatever, they're out there. About 50% of the people who burn out from activism just like quit and never return to it. So you want to create a sustainable, lasting sort of thing. You were even talking about earlier about how a lot of this stuff talked about in Hold the Line can be very useful after election day, after inauguration day, for whatever happens in the future. These are good building blocks for that. So having that team of minimum 2, but as many as you can work with and manage and create a symbiotic, helpful like relationship with, are definitely useful for that. And then from there, building out a plan as far as what are the key power players, whether it's a mayor or chief of police or like whatever quasi accountable people that exist that you can keep accountable, that you can hold pressure to, really keeping in mind that at the end of the day, these people who are elected in power feel accountable because they haven't felt the pressure of attention yet. And by showing them more attention and actually making them fear for their jobs at minimum, that there can actually be progress done, and history has shown that pretty well. So I think that's all very good to like kind of get together and lay out for people and really kind of condition people to bring in and have.